Okay, this is the second half of my diatribe that's still uploading actually about justice having to be a two-way street. I mentioned the Nuremberg trials. In some respects, the Nuremberg trials were a failure, and the reason for that is that a lot of people got saved from being put on trial who really probably should have been. One example that comes to mind, and this is just one example, but it's an example that I know about, I know the history there, is a fellow by the name of Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun, he actually run the factory that manufactured the V2 rocket. The V2 rocket was an unmanned aircraft, basically, that was sent over England from Germany. It was actually sent over England, and it would well, basically people were terrified of this thing because if you heard it overhead, you'd hear that engine running, and it had a very distinct sound to it. And whenever that stopped, whenever the engine stopped running, that meant it was going to fall. And if you were underneath it, you died. It destroyed blocks and blocks of London, England, square blocks. It killed a lot of innocent civilians. And this factory where Werner von Braun manufactured these rockets, it all run on slave labor from the concentration camps, most of whom were Jewish people, but not exclusively, because there were a lot of different groups targeted. But Jewish people and others were forced to work in the rocket factory, in the V2 rocket factory. And what they did is every week, every Friday, they would hang the two slowest slaves in front of the factory. They'd hang their bodies up there, and they'd leave their dead bodies hanging there all week. And then the next Friday, they'd cut those two corpses down, and they'd hang the next two slowest workers. This was to put fear into the hearts, just to terrorize those people, so that they'd work hard so that didn't happen to them. That man was rescued from the Nuremberg trials, didn't go on trial, didn't hang, and really he probably should have. At least that's my opinion. He became the head of NASA. Werner von Braun was the first director of NASA. And so, in some respects, the Nuremberg trials failed. However, I do believe that we need to have, after this latest incident, I do believe we need to have Nuremberg trials, or at least that style of trial. Now, maybe I'm wrong, that's just my personal opinion. But the thing is, if you look what happened when I posted that on Facebook, where Facebook said I was promoting hatred and violence, I never said anything about hatred or violence. What I talked about is the due process of law, which we're all subject to. At least I am, and you probably are too. You go out and you hurt your enemy, and everybody has enemies. I don't care who you are. There's always somebody out there who you would call your enemy and who would call you his enemy. And the thing is, if you go out there, though, and you intentionally hurt that person, you'll be held to account for that. And like I say, rightly so. I'm not against that. But here's the thing. The elites and the powerful and all the rest of them, they need to be held to account too. And what I'm asking is, why can't we have that conversation without being accused of promoting hatred and violence? If I was advocating for assassinations and for mobs to form and go after these people, to storm parliament buildings and official residences and whatnot and drag these people out into the street and hurt them or kill them, well then yeah, that reaction would be justified. That's not what I'm talking about doing. I'm talking about having a proper trial, a fair and impartial trial, where they have every chance to be found not guilty if the evidence shows they're not guilty, but where they also have a chance to be found guilty if the evidence shows that they are guilty, and where they will be punished to the fullest extent of the law, just like anyone else, for whatever involvement they had in it, up to and including death, up to and including the death penalty. But there again, I'm talking about judicial execution. I'm not talking about, a mob going in there and grabbing these people up and exacting revenge or whatever. I'm not talking about that. And so it goes to show, though, we can't even have the discussion. The fact that I would post something where I suggest and where I say, in my opinion, we need to have trials for these people. And if they're found guilty, we need to punish them to the fullest extent of the law, including, in some cases, judicial executions. Again, why can't I say that without being accused of some aberration? I mean, we can't even have the discussion. And that's an issue. Look, I may be wrong. Maybe we shouldn't have trials like that. But, if I am wrong and people can argue against it in a sensible way, good for them. They should argue against it in a sensible way if they can. But it's the fact that we're not even allowed to have the conversation. That's a concerning thing. The fact that we can't even, that a person like me can't say, in my opinion, this is what should happen, without the powers that be saying, you can't say that. Well, I can say it, and I will say it. I might get shut down for saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway. Because in my opinion, it needs to be said. The bottom line is, I know my history. I know how things go. And I've seen through an awful lot of stuff that's been happening lately. And, I know my history going back even quite a ways. I'm not talking about just Canadian history. I know things about ancient history, too. And there's nothing new under the sun. What we're seeing now is talked about in the Bible. It's talked about in ancient texts of different types. We think we invented all this stuff, but we didn't. We perpetuate it, but we didn't invent it. It existed long before any of us did. It existed in a world none of us can imagine, where things were so different that we can't even grasp it mentally, how different things really were. So, the bottom line is, because even though things were different, human nature really hasn't changed. And so all this stuff has always been around. But here's the thing. We need to have these discussions because we need to heal. We've been damaged, any way you look at it, whether it's the fault of the Prime Minister or Anthony Fauci or Bill Gates or not. Personally, I believe it is. But even if I'm wrong and it isn't, it's hard to dispute that whatever's happened, we've been injured. And now we need to have these discussions. We need to talk about this stuff. We need to be free to talk about it. And really, as people who are injured parties, it's our right to talk about it. I mean, if somebody comes into your house and beats you half to death and violates you and robs you, you have every right to talk about that. As a victim of that, you have every right to talk about it. And that's what I'm saying anyway. We have been violated and robbed and everything else, at least in my opinion we have been, and hurt in many ways. I have 2 close family members now, and I'm not going to say who they are, but I have 2 close family members now who I strongly suspect have been injured by the shots. I'll just put it that way. They took the shots, and in my opinion, the problems they're having now are related to that. And these are problems that are potentially deadly. And I guarantee you, I don't normally get up and speak at funerals and whatnot. But if either of them passes and it's a direct result, if I concede it's a direct result of what's happened, or it most likely is, I am going to get up and speak. And I'm going to say something that's probably going to offend a lot of people. But basically what I'm going to say is this person was murdered. This person who I love, who means an awful lot to me, was murdered. And I'm going to lay it on the line if it comes down to it. I hope that I never have to make that speech. I hope that, well, there's one person in particular, I hope that they will be making a speech at my funeral, and not the other way around. And that's how it should be, because I'm older than this person I'm talking about by basically by a decade. So, yeah. Anyway, the bottom line is this. I think a lot of us have loved ones. If we're not going through it ourselves, we have loved ones that are going through complications related to what's happened. So, I think there needs to be accountability for that. And, there are people who have lost everything. There are people who have died. There's people who have been put into a state where, they wish they were dead, really, because they're suffering so badly. And their quality of life is gone. And there needs to be accountability for that, at least in my opinion. And like I say, even if I'm wrong, the conversation needs to be had. I need to be able to say what I think, and others need to be able to say why I'm wrong, if I'm wrong. The fact that we're not allowed to have the conversation is the most troubling thing. Anyway, on a happier note, here's our Rocky again. He always cheers everybody up. There he is. He's sleeping. Look at him, eh? And I have my heat on. I did get the heater working. I had to fool around with it for quite a while, but I did get it working. And so it's a little nicer in here than it was. It was pretty cold in here, I'll tell you, for a while. I was shivering. I've taken a couple of cold and flu tablets. I don't normally like to take any drugs, but I haven't been sleeping lately. I'm feeling it in my sinuses now. There's something coming on. I don't feel altogether well. And so, between the cold and the dampness and health problems that I have that cause me pain and discomfort and so on, I just haven't been sleeping very well. And it's taken its toll on me. So I'm going to go to sleep very shortly. And I want to wish you all a happy night and sweet dreams. And Rocky and I will see you in the morning. Bye-bye for now.